Thank you very much. Well, I'm delighted to say that this session is going to include some audience participation and questions. So I'm going to introduce our guests and invite them to speak for 5 minutes each around the topic of the next few years and the opportunities for research and development in the arts. We have the opportunity both for an overview from Hasan Bakhshi from Nesta, and we have the opportunity to hear more specifically about plans in two key institutions, the British Museum and the Watershed in Bristol. So, and that's from Tim Plyming and from Victoria Tillotson. So can I start off by inviting Hasan to address the issues overall? Thank you, Hasan.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Well, I was just sort of thinking on the way up this morning about what personally sort of excites me about technology in the arts. Where do I see the main opportunities in the use of technologies in the arts? And from my point of view, it's really the incredible opportunities that technology presents to test our assumptions, deeply held assumptions about the nature of the arts and culture. Whether this is about our assumptions on the nature of the live experience, about the social context in which culture is experienced, about the relationship between the artists and the public, about the nature of innovation in the arts and culture itself, which is something of obvious interest to Nesta, and about, in fact, what culture itself is. And the opportunity I wanted to single out in particular is the possibility of building a culture in the arts where organisations are expected to capture and share insights from their experiments, and importantly, certainly in today's context, are funded to do so. So there are two dimensions, I think, to this. The first actually isn't specific to technology, and that's unless you're lucky enough to be actually involved in an experiment in the arts or have had personal contacts with those who have been, the results are in effect kept behind closed doors. They're out of bounds. The lack of a research structure has meant that even those undertaking the experiments, in my experience, do not learn as much from them as they could. 3 orchestras trial multi-platform simulcast for their concerts, and it's fraught with technical problems. Another trials a mobile ticketing app, and it works. A theatre company tries to offer online audiences the interactive live experience that is at the heart of their immersive work, but things don't turn out as planned. So what practical lessons can we learn from these results? What can other cultural institutions take away from these cases? Now, not having answers to these questions is, I think, particularly problematic when the projects in question have received public funding. Here, it strikes me, and for reasons of value for money, if not ethics, there are very strong reasons indeed for expecting lessons to be shared. And the only question then is which projects are by their nature amenable to reflection, analysis, and codification of the sorts that we're trying to support through the R&D Fund, in a way that most audience-facing technology projects, of course, are. And what methods should be used to capture and share these lessons? I'm reminded here of a proverb that the Tate used to open its recent collection on collaboration: to go fast, go alone; to go far, go together. The second dimension of knowledge sharing, which it strikes me is very specific to digital technologies, insofar it relates to insofar as they provide new opportunities for evaluating innovations in the arts. Now, as in other areas of our life, the fact that we as consumers are spending so much time engaging with culture online leaves a data imprint which makes it easier for arts organisations to structure and aggregate it, and so refine their understandings of what their consumers want, what their public wants. Cultural institutions have an opportunity to integrate these learning objectives into their projects from their very outset. And I know this is something that Anthony Lilley will be picking up on in his session this afternoon. So just briefly, I wanted to give a concrete example of the sort of shared learning I have in mind. Many of you will know that the inspiration for the digital R&D funds was our 2009 collaboration with the National Theatre and its NT live broadcasts. There, one of the propositions we were interested in testing was the extent to which live broadcasts provided inferior or superior experiences to cinema audiences than what audiences were getting at the theatre. Now, in the event, as many of you will know, we were surprised to learn that cinema audiences consistently described themselves as engaging more with the production than did theatre audiences. And at the same time, the success of these broadcasts had not in any way been at the expense of attendances at the productions at the National. In fact, if anything, we found significant evidence that the NT Live broadcast had positively recruited audiences for the live productions at the theatre. Now, I think it's fair to say that these insights played some role in building up the groundswell of interest from arts organisations and funders in simulcasting. But imagine now that a similar research infrastructure had been in place when the NT ran its encore performances of NT Live Phèdre and NT Live Frankenstein, which improved our understanding of the value of the live itself, or that the National had streamed a live production online as a publicly funded experiment, giving us an opportunity to rigorously investigate the value of the social, or that an NT Live broadcast had been coordinated with regional theatres to quantify its impact on audiences for regional theatre. I'm not making a point about the National Theatre here, it's just to illustrate there's a huge potential for the arts to learn from such experiments. In all these cases, I'd contend, knowledge would have been created that would have been of great value to the wider sector. The opportunity for the arts, in my mind, is to ensure that a learning infrastructure is in place to make sure that such experiments, when they do take place, do so in a way that we can all learn from. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Tim, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, lovely to be here. Paul asked me just to cover a couple of things. One thing that we're currently working on at the British Museum at the moment, and then also some of the one of the really big themes that we're thinking through as well. Many of you know the museum. I haven't been there a huge amount of time, but what struck me since I arrived is just what an enormous opportunity it is, particularly with the focus of the conference today. The museum has the purpose, I mean, set out in 1753 of being the museum of the world, tells the story essentially of our human history for the world, so the history of the world for the world. And the museum's realising over time, particularly with experiments it's doing, that it can do that better using digital technology than it can with the building in Holborn. And so the opportunities there are enormous, and in a moment I'll touch on one of the themes that we're thinking of. But for someone coming essentially from a more traditional broadcasting background to come into the museum and to realise that we're sitting on 8 million objects that tell the entire story of human history from the first ever object that a human being ever picked up to an object that tells us about our world today. The solar panel is an example, as an object we picked that tells you everything you need to know about the world and the link between our different countries by the solar panel. You suddenly realise we're sitting on this enormous resource, and we can do the job of the museum better using digital technology in many ways than we can with that building. One project that we're working on at the moment, and it's particularly fitting that we're talking about it today in the context of what we've just been thinking around with NT Live. The museum on Thursday is going to announce that we're doing the first ever live cinema broadcast for an exhibition that the museum will do. Now, we were due to announce it on Thursday, but Paul convinced me just to allow you, so I'm afraid you're not allowed to tell anyone until Thursday. But we're going to do a live cinema broadcast around our exhibition coming up on Pompeii and Herculaneum. So we're pulling together the largest collection of objects from Pompeii and Herculaneum at the time of the eruption in AD 79. And we are building a really exciting format, very much following. I mean, we are huge fans of the work that's happening with alternative content around theatre and opera, and some other formats. And we think that there's a really big opportunity for exhibitions as well. So this is going to be, one of the great landmark exhibitions for the museum. It will be probably the last time a lot of these objects leave Italy. The title of the exhibition is Life and Death in Pompeii and Herculaneum. So we tell the story of what life was like the 24 hours before the ash fell, and we are creating a Pompeii street in the museum with a baker's shop and a garden and a bedroom. And so what we're doing is thinking, well, how can we bring that experience to the exhibition and make even more of it really through a live broadcast, an 80 to 90 minute live broadcast. And of course what we can do with that is actually provide, of course, much more detail in some ways in the objects than you would you would see if you get up close. So we can do that, but also put it in context. You know, the great thing about that exhibition is having Neil McGregor, our director, and Paul Roberts, the curator, enthusing us about the story of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and it is absolutely enthralling. And you sort of feel as a normal visitor, you somehow miss out on the context that really brings those objects alive. What looks like a terracotta pot suddenly becomes extraordinary when Neil McGregor is explaining that. So the lineup will include Neil McGregor and Bethany Hughes telling us about sex in the bedroom in Pompeii, and Giorgio Locatelli telling us about kitchen life, Rachel de Tame telling us about the garden. So the idea is that we create something based on the exhibition, but also works as a live broadcast, very much inspired by the work that Nesta supported for NT Live. So more detail about that on Thursday, and we're hoping to go to about 250 cinemas across the UK and potentially internationally as well. So that's one thing that we're focusing on, working at 1,000 miles an hour at the moment. And alongside that, my new team is also one of the themes we're doing is really grappling with the idea of how we can extend the relationship that people have with the museum. So we're the most visited UK visitor attraction, over 6 million visitors a year, 70% of those are international. But what I'm aware of is that one of the stats that struck me when I arrived was the majority of our visitors will only visit once in their life. So they, on average, they'll come once, they'll stay for somewhere between 2 or 2.5 hours, and that is it. I mean, that is their relationship. Now, the approval rating is, almost 100%. They love it. I mean, it's free, but they love it. They have a fantastic experience, but they, on average, will spend 2 hours there once in their life, and they will then fly back to America or Hong Kong or China, and that will be over. And one of the big themes we're thinking of is particularly on your point about the physical and the digital, how we can turn that into a relationship that continues when people go. And what I've been saying in the museum is a relationship that they can have with the museum every day for the rest of their life. And so the museum, again, there hasn't been a big focus on how you can start a relationship before someone comes to the museum, how you enhance that relationship on their 2 or 3 hour visit, and actually could we extend that? What the majority of our visitors say is we realised how big it was and how many galleries, we'd have probably booked more than the morning. They've come up with a schedule for London and Buckingham Palace and eating at Planet Hollywood and all the other things they do, and they sort of think, gosh, I wish I'd known how big it was, because I'd have allowed more than 2 hours. So how does the relationship inform how long they spend at the museum during their physical experience, the pre-planning, the visit, and then a relationship they can have for the rest of their life? And on your point about potentially driving visitors back, can we get them to visit more than once in their life as well, and perhaps spend a bit of money in the UK when they come as well? So that's one of the big themes. I've realised I'm over time, so that's one thing we're thinking about.
Thank you very much, Tim. Victoria.
So we were asked to focus on what the opportunities will be over the next 3 years. I only really know what's going to happen in the next 3 minutes, so I thought I'd tell you about the last 3 years with a view to how I think things might unfold. In 2010, 2 young artists calling themselves Stand and Stare Collective turned up at Watershed's Pervasive Media Studio with an idea to create a theatrical experience that would be devoid of actors but would play out on a jukebox-type machine. They applied for a couple of our development programs, but their plan was a bit sketchy, and they didn't quite make it through the interview stages, but we really felt like they did have the seed of an idea. So in a nimble move, we shuffled some budgets around, invented a micro-residency specifically for them, introduced them to a creative technologist, awarded them 500 quid, plus some of our time, space, and support to help them get their idea off the ground. 3 years on, Theatre Jukebox is a fully fledged digital platform that lets objects tell their stories. It's currently on show at the Royal Shakespeare Company and has this year been nominated against thousands of international entries for an Interactive Arts Award at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. So how does it work? I suggest you all Google Stand and Stare Theatre Jukebox while I'm talking, because there's some great photos on their website which will illustrate my description of the project. So audiences are invited to take a seat at a wooden arcade-style cabinet, put on some headphones, and choose from a selection of photos which are laid out in front of them. They place a photo in front of them, and each photo has hidden inside it an RFID tag, which triggers a kind of top-down projection and audio into the headphones that are specific to that image. Each photo plays a 2-minute sequence, which is a short story told using film, animation, or just simply audio. On its own, each photo gives you a self-contained and unique experience, but if you continue, you realize there's a kind of non-linear narrative between all the images, and you can start to draw connections between the photos, which build a wider story. What's really lovely about it is that audience members can spend just a few minutes or a half hour listening to stories because they have control over how many and in which order they choose photos. And this is a digital platform, and it's a unique, accessible way to tell stories, open archives, and share histories. But to audiences, it's an analog experience. They're simply moving physical objects around, watching, listening, learning, and sharing. I give you this example because technology is a tool that pervades our everyday. Much of the time we don't even notice it, but it continues to make our lives simple, richer, quicker, easier in more and more seamless ways. Hands up how many of you just Googled theatre jukebox while I was talking and still followed everything I said. So there's quite a few people. So while some people are only just catching up with digital, I think we need a parallel focus on where technologies can enable appropriate and meaningful cultural experiences and how these experiences can influence perspectives, expectations, and behaviours. Culture, society, art, and technology, they're intertwined and they're all constantly evolving. I believe the opportunities lie in recognizing this and producing spaces in which artists like Stand and Stare can have time and support to build relationships with institutions, academics, scientists, technologists, audience, to share ideas, take risks, embrace openness, and collaboratively respond to our changing landscape. It's at this juncture that new practice emerges and that great ideas begin.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Well, we've had 3 really interesting contributions there. Hasan talking about building a learning infrastructure for R&D in the arts, for news about cultural live streaming from the British Museum, and the values of embedding technology in a particular arts experience in the Watershed. We've got the opportunity now for some questions to each of our panelists, or to all of them. Could I ask you, please, there are some mics. All you need to do is raise your hand and one will be offered to you. Please make sure that you hold the mic closely to your mouth so that we can hear you, and do introduce your name and organisation. Thank you very much.
Hello, just a quick start of a 10. Hi, my name is Stuart Dempster. I work for JISC, which is the technology agency for higher and further education in the UK. It's really a question for museums and arts organisations more broadly. What role you see as for crowdfunding? So in the UK last year we had Kickstarter starting off, and what role that might play in terms of generating income.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll see if we can pick up 1 or 2 other questions, and then we can deal with them as a group. Who's next? Anybody want to supplement crowdfunding? Here we are. Name and organisation, please.
Hi. I'm Nikki Matthews from University of Southampton. It's really what distinct or specific role do you see as academics and universities having? And do you see them as having distinct roles as opposed to arts organisations, or is it a fairly fluid type of experience, do you think?
Okay, well, we'll take those 2 questions around crowdsourcing of funding and the role of universities and academics in R&D for the arts. Victoria, would you like to kick off on both of those?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there is a space for crowdfunding, definitely. But it just really depends on the idea. You know, the idea has to be something that people feel that they can connect with and they want to get on board with and they want to support, because you know, everything works on a value system. So to encourage people to kind of individually give to a project, they have to feel that there's some value in that for them to encourage them to do it. So I think there is a place for it, but you kind of have to think about what that kind of loop is and how that economy can work. In terms of the role of academics, I mean, I think there is, you know, a major place for academics within this sphere of research and development and working across technology, arts, and academia. At Watershed, we are currently working on one of the AHRC hubs in collaboration with the University of West of England, University of Bristol, Bath, Exeter, and Cardiff. And we are running a series of R&D programs, which have already started, which will run over 4 years, in which we are funding kind of cohorts of projects which bring together creative industries practitioners with academics, technologists, and each of our programs is themed slightly differently. So we ran one called Heritage Sandbox, which we did just earlier in the year, which funded 6 cultural projects looking at how arts, culture and heritage can work together. We're currently running Books and Print Sandbox. But I think, you know, some really brilliant things can come out of these kind of relationships. And, you know, each one is led by people's personal passion. And in each one, everybody's had to learn to expect the unexpected, because things have come out which they haven't imagined. A great project which ran on the Heritage Sandbox was a collaboration between a historian at Bristol University, a pervasive games company called Splash and Ripple, and the Holborn Museum, and they created these beautiful Georgian listening devices which visitors to the museum could take round the Victorian gardens and listen to kind of stories from people of the past who were present in that space. So it used like proper historical factual information which the academic from Bristol University brought to the project. And the Pervasive Games Company were able to take that amazing knowledge and research and kind of transpose that into something which was audience facing and worked really well for engaging visitors to the museum in a kind of new and surprising way. So I think, you know, everybody played their part in that project, and I think kind of working together, looking at where people's strengths and knowledge can come together to create something that's really unique is, you know, it's really valuable.
Thank you, Victoria. Tim, actually, I'm just thinking that these two questions are very topically connected, because the activities around the discovery of King Richard III in a car park involved a lot of academic involvement and a lot of crowdfunding of resources from stakeholders all over the world. Anyway, Tim.
Yeah, that was going to be my point, so that saved a minute. No, absolutely, with the Richard III stuff, we've seen that a lot this week. So crowdsourcing is really interesting. The British Museum look after UK-wide organisation recently taken over called the Portable Antiquities Scheme. So if you are someone minded to go out at the weekends with a metal detector and go metal detecting, should you find something at some point, you come through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and we have a base at the British Museum in London, and we have 15 regional coordinators as well. And things are always being found and being offered to the museum to buy, and we go into a very traditional piece of fundraising to do that. We have an absolutely brilliant development team, but I have started, so our great friends at JISC, it was like you were in a meeting I was in yesterday with that question, because we essentially had a session yesterday where we were thinking around how we can create some alternative funding opportunities around some of the items that we discovered with the Portable Antiquities Scheme. There are items in the museum that are on loan to us and we are hoping to buy. We do not currently tell our wealthy American visitors that item is something that we'd like to have long term. And of course, with some of the digital services that we're hoping to develop, there should be a way in which we can let you know that, and we can give you some options to be able to support that work as well. So really, just in terms of that question, yes, there are huge opportunities, and I think to break some of the traditional development models. You know, a lot of us in the room will be used to having to influence some of those traditional processes that are currently there, and you know, part of my jobs team is to help, you know, our development team find new ways of supporting that. So yes, I think there are opportunities. And again, on that role of academics, I mean, I think that what we saw with the Richard III was important, because I think the thing that strikes me about the opportunity with academics is how we get a huge range of different resources through universities than you can have just from one institution. So what I thought was interesting about that University of Leicester work was that they pulled together 5 different departments across the university to help research. And so you know, that would be, you know, for Richard III, they were able to pull in, you know, guys from their English and drama faculty and from their sort of CSI faculty and from their digital presentation faculties. So what I think is really brilliant about universities is that you can perhaps pitch sort of one piece of research work, but they may then go and speak to other people in the university to build that bigger, and I think that's quite a unique resource. We're just in some early discussions with University College London about some of their facilities that they have. So they have fantastic 3D scanning facilities and 3D capture. Now, you know, it's an area that's of interest to me, but it's going to be a while before I have my own 3D studio at the British Museum. So, you know, this is something that, again, we can work really well. And I think the third thing would be that we can, you know, academics and students are constantly looking for research work and things that they can do. You know, I want to work in a much more agile way in our organisation to be able to say, if there's something which interests us and I want to commission a short bit of research to be done, is there a way that we can work with academics for that to be done? Because we all know, you know, the process of having to sort of go through and hire staff and build the project, you know, it will be 24 months before we get anyone in, and then by that stage the opportunity might have passed. So the ability to be much more agile and say, could we offer some of the things we're interested as research work for some of our academic partners, I'd have thought that was used to both organisations. So I hope that answers your question. Have to pick up in coffee.
Thank you very much, Tim. Hasan, I was slightly struck by the kind of academic kickback against the University of Leicester for its kind of responsiveness to the opportunity. Is that going to be a feature of academic involvement in R&D in the arts?
Yeah, I think the first point to say is, in the same way we would not question what the role of university and academic researchers should be in research and development in a science and technology context, we shouldn't, you know, we shouldn't question the important role that academic researchers should play in R&D in the arts. I mean, there's the question of informing design of an experiment and of a project in such a way that it's amenable to testing propositions if you're coming at it from a social scientist like I am, or from evaluating a new experience or an innovative experience if you're coming at it from the art form. Clearly an academic's rigour is important there in terms of informing the design. The methodologies that are used, obviously, to actually capture the knowledge, testing propositions, again, if you're coming at it as an economist, these are things which are as skilled and as specialised as equivalent methodologies in an S&T context. One of the big challenges, of course, that we've got with the sort of R&D that we're talking about here is that often certainly arts organisations and cultural institutions may not be are not the same beasts, as it were, as traditional technology partners for an academic if you're doing R&D. They're different organisations, different horizons, different, with different talents. That requires, we talk about the concept of agility. It requires a certain skill set and a set of competencies on the behalf of the academics to actually work with them. And without a doubt, that's a challenge because university research funding streams are not set up in a way with the time horizons that arts organisations may have in mind. The nature of the the research outputs may not necessarily fit into the traditional modes of disseminating knowledge that academics use, monographs, journal publications. So these are all, and also the other important point that Tim made about interdisciplinarity. It's by the very nature of the research questions, the propositions that we're exploring and testing, they are innately more multidisciplinary than S&T propositions or R&D propositions. Again, I'm sort of simplifying here about how I'm characterising R&D in a science context, but these things are very, very important. I mean, one thing I think it is important to say though that. It's really important that we do bring the rigour. We have very high levels of ambition in terms of the R&D propositions and the research that we do. And it's certainly one of the things that I would be concerned, for example, if the research outputs from the sorts of R&D collaborations that we've been talking about were not finding their way into traditional forum which academics work. I'd be concerned if there were no I'd want to know why it was the case that these insights were not making their way into peer-reviewed formats, even recognising the limitations that those traditional formats have. But there is an issue about quality. We need to develop mechanisms of evaluating the quality of the research that's coming out of these collaborations. That's something we've only just begun to think about, really.
Crowdfunding, did you?
Crowdfunding, I think, should be seen as the latest in a line of innovations, which essentially are aggregation technologies, which allow sources of finance to be aggregated efficiently. Banks, financial intermediaries like stock markets can be seen as remarkable innovations, social innovations, which have enabled that to happen. Crowdfunding clearly is the latest in such technology innovation. It's enabled by the internet, frankly. I think, in terms of in the next 3-5 years, what would it mean for the arts? Clearly, it will be it's a way of aggregating what would be small sources of supply and investment, which would not otherwise sort of find their way, as it were, towards organisations that need them. Do I think it's a substitute for scale investors? So, for example, thinking about the Arts Council of England, private investors that make large investments in cultural content, and will crowdfunding be a substitute for that? No, I don't think it will.
Thank you, Hasan. Can we pick up a couple more questions? And can I also say that James Davis very kindly said he'd be happy to answer any specific questions about the Google Cultural Institute as well. One here.
Funny you should say Google Cultural Institute. My name's Jeffrey Brown from Euclid. I'm still reeling slightly from the Google presentation. I just wanted to sort of see if I can get some views from the panel. It was a really fascinating presentation. Once upon a time, transnational support for those sorts of initiatives would have been in the hands of public agencies such as UNESCO or the European Union. European Union is spending gazillions of euros on Europeana and so on and so forth. I think there are arguments that what Google is doing is cutting through bureaucracy and being very innovative and very exciting. On the other hand, it's Google. And I think that there are some questions there. It was mentioned that we want Google to be the platform for culture online. An interesting point, I felt. He also talked about collaboration. I wonder where their collaboration begins and ends. Does their collaboration involve collaboration with Apple and Microsoft and other similar technology partners, or is it only with the arts and culture? How does the British Museum and Watershed, being two quite different organisations, see potential involvement with Google or any other sort of large organisations involved in these sorts of initiatives? I think that's an interesting question. Yeah,
that's a big one. I'm going to keep that on its own and ask for 3 quick responses from the panel, then ask James to come back on it. Victoria, do you have a view on this?
Sorry, I was just trying to think of some responses to that because it's quite a big question. I think that there is massive potential to work with Google to create some really, really interesting things. I think Google are being very innovative in the way that they are cutting through the red tape and being nimble and light-footed, and I almost think we can all kind of take note of that and think about the way that we work ourselves in terms of, that kind of response to getting things going. I think whether Google control culture online, well, I guess that's up to us, the way in which we choose to collaborate with them and the kinds of products and services and experiences that we make. If they were to collaborate with Watershed, for example. I mean, we have a history of working with technology companies, so the Pervasive Media Studio itself grew out of a collaboration with Hewlett-Packard. We've got very close connections with Microsoft with some of our projects. We're working with IBM on a project at the moment. And so it's finding ways to work with technology companies which is meaningful and appropriate to the project that you're trying to create. And also everybody entering, kind of creating a space for everybody to enter a neutral zone, so there's no kind of, kind of one person shepherding it more than the other. And I think that's where the role of the producer comes in really strongly. So, organisations like Watershed and many other kind of freelancers and other organisations around the country who are doing similar things.
That's great.
Okay.
Tim, quick response to you on.
Yes, so look, it's a great question. For the museum, our key thing is to connect as much of our collection with people around the world as we can. I mean, one of the things that Google is doing is getting everyone to raise their game in some ways. If we go back to the audience and what the audience want, audiences are now around the world starting to say, why shouldn't I be able to visit this piece of art or this object, and why can't I get it? Why can't I get it on my device? And of course, it all goes back to sort of, either sort of old-fashioned systems or old-fashioned ways slightly of doing things. And so if you start with the audience, the audience is saying, look, we expect to be able to get this. And of course, Google has the kind of technology where it's able to do that. And I think one of the great things about that Google is doing is getting everyone to really have to think about this very fast. Institutions can't think, well, we're not going to think about that, or we're going to sort of not worry about that for 10 years. Everyone is having to think very fast about that. And I think ultimately that's a really good thing for all of us. For the museum, it's really important that we'll never be working with anyone who makes that really exclusive, who we feel adds a sort of layer of control over to those objects, because that goes right back to our founding in 1753. And I don't think there's no sense that I got from today's presentation that's where Google are at. I mean, my sense is that Google really come at this saying, look, we've got the technology, this is a very interesting space, we're there. And of course, people are slightly concerned about what that might mean, but generally I think it's making everyone raise their game, and it's making the British Museum raise its game, and ultimately that has to be a good thing, I think.
Thank you, Tim.
I think we should be very careful about, one of the assumptions that technology challenges, of course, about who are the gatekeepers. It's not obvious to me that UNESCO, some of the other institutions that you mentioned, should be the gatekeepers in the cultural sector. In fact, if an open platform, the more open the platform, like Google, with its technology offer, is actually reaching out to the arts and cultural sector to try and help organisations such as the British Museum meet its core missions, and I'm absolutely delighted. So I don't share that concern at all.
James, have you got a mic? Good. Right, okay. Over to you.
Hi. So thank you. A great question. It is absolutely right that you sort of question and think about what Google is doing, because Google is very powerful and is very successful in many of its avenues of activity. So I kind of say that what we're doing in the cultural arena is separate from that. There are kind of legal separations, there are financial separations. Everything we do is absolutely non-exclusive, as Tim points out. And in fact, we promote that non-exclusivity by welcoming the content that you upload to the Cultural Institute platforms, you can then transform into other more reusable content, download it and take it somewhere else. And we absolutely strongly promote that. And again, as we're building tools and services that our partners can use without ever kind of having a direct interface with the front end of the Cultural Institute. So that's something that we're particularly keen on. And just a part of your question about the collaboration between the very different styles and types of organizations, which maybe hasn't happened in the past because there hasn't been an easy way for it to happen, or the governing bodies that represent those organizations differ so widely that there hasn't been that cross-domain kind of promotion and collaboration. I suppose everyone here is right in that we're able to cut through some of that red tape and some of those legacies in some ways through, because we keep it strictly through technology and our own passions about culture, we can approach it with some naivety in a way. And we can say, well, we don't necessarily need to pay heed to some of the complex legacies that may have held people back or form in red tape. And instead we offer usable and reusable and shareable platforms, and it's up to you how you use them and how you reuse them. Just regards other, other people in this space and other technology companies, we don't really want to be a gatekeeper. We absolutely want to be a facilitator. So we want to allow everyone else to create their own homes for culture. I personally think that we're going to do an amazing job at making a home for culture. Of course, because we're non-exclusive, other homes will exist, and that's a great thing. And so it's always important that everyone keeps companies like Google on their toes. And I hope that having people like me work there who are very passionate and committed about it, and having our very strict lines that we draw between some of the other areas of Google's activity, will help keep our products and services and our offer very compelling and very fresh and very innovative.
Thank you very much, James. I'm very sorry to have to bring this session to a close because it's been extremely interesting, but on your behalf, can I please thank our panel speakers?